Very good. Yes. Very good. I guess we can start now. Seems like a good timing. So first, I would like to welcome you all to the UTA peer-to-peer learning session today for the topic of urban food system. My name is Inchiden, and together here with my colleagues, Rebecca Wessinghage, both from ICLEI Secretariat, are hosting the event today. So in this session, we will focus our discussion on the topic of urban food system as a catalyst for social inclusion. So in this session, we will share a few real examples from different member cities, and we would like to also discuss critical challenges and barriers to successfully implement urban food project. So how do we consider the right location to do it? What are the regulatory tasks, and how to access to finance and engage with our community? And today we will have 3 speakers with us, each one with a short presentation, and there will be a short Q&A opportunity followed by each presentation. Allow us to address maybe a few urgent burning questions for the speakers. And at the end, we will open the floor for everyone to discuss the topic openly and freely, as well as to ask perhaps the speaker the follow-up questions. And this session will be guided by a few guiding questions. So, no further ado, today's topic is one of the top priority area for our first speaker. He would like to kick off the discussion by sharing with us his work in Glasgow and his thoughts and learning around the topics. So let us welcome Collins, and floor is yours, Collins.
Thanks, Yingqi. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well. So yeah, just to give you a brief overview, the circular economy route map was written last year during the pandemic, and I suppose during that period of time it gave us some pause for thought about how to actually develop various aspects. And one of the things that came to light during that period of reflection was around urban food systems for the city. If you want to move on, Yingqi. So yeah, this elegant quote from William McDonough basically covers our concept of the circular economy and the way we've implemented it into policy in Glasgow, based around restorative and regenerative systems, and the idea that economic activities should actually strengthen the social and environmental resources of the city. And from that, the idea that we know that as Glasgow historically as a strong industrial powerhouse, we know that the profile of the city has changed, and it's changed remarkably over the past 40 years. If you want to move on. So yes, we're not just a post-industrial city, we're also relatively now a post-manufacturing city. A lot of the economy is based in the service industry. It's based on events, it's based on hospitality, and those elements of the circular economy, which would normally be the industrial processes of eco-design, etc., are slightly out with our grasp. However, there are elements to the city that we feel that we can significantly influence. And obviously, because of the post-industrial and the post-industrial past, we have got a lot of vacant and derelict land, a lot of contaminated land, a lot of land that has lain empty for many years, and we can see that a lot of that is close to some of the areas of Glasgow that has got that enduring and complex social issues of poverty and deprivation, and areas where the citizens are furthest from the job market, you know, and unemployment is relatively high. So we began to think, you know, what are the main elements of a circular economy that could really impact and create a socially inclusive policy, the one that could really drive social justice and create something about participation and democratization of the citizenship, to really take ownership of their lives, and to really drive forward the ideas around things like community wealth building. And we saw that the food systems could be a way to do that. The pandemic revealed inherent weaknesses within the current system around food supply, security of supply, and especially around transportation. And we saw that the reliance on the over-reliance on the existing system could be something that we challenge, and something that we could maybe recreate a new mindset for the city, to bring resilience, to identify that security within communities. And I think the main challenge for myself and my colleagues is to really identify the idea of making Glasgow a much more localised economy, and something that's close to the citizens, and something that's based around the ideas coming from Paris and Mayor Hidalgo and her ideas of a 15-minute city. That's something that we've started to really embrace in Glasgow, and we can see the circular economy and all the aspects of the circular economy around repair and sharing and reuse, all being like essential to that, and being something that we can really internalize and look inward within the city itself, and have that local impact. And obviously through the food aspect, we saw that, you know, there's, you know, major benefits can be derived from food growing, from accessibility, security, diversity. There's also the ideas around organic farming and, you know, healthy, nutritious food, also brought to the market, maybe with lower costs, to help our less advantaged citizens as well to access that. And we also see that there's ideas around mental health and well-being, you know, attached to engaging with nature, and the ideas around food growing. If you want to move on, you can say that'd be good. If you go back one. Yeah, so we've got a strong community food growing network in the city. We've got a new policy that's just been went through consultation, and it's been adopted by the city based on the Glasgow Community Food Network. And that really kind of identifies that food growing is a popular aspect in the city. However, it's carried out by many disparate and very small groups, not really with the capacity of scaling up out with some backing, some financing to help them in that aspect, and certainly not in an industrial approach. I suppose we engaged with cities and with Iceland especially, to discuss the ideas around food growing. Iceland was something that we were quite interested in because of the island itself has an arable land percentage of around 7 to 8%. So that's similar to Glasgow. Glasgow's got quite a small boundary within the west of Scotland, and we can see that there's constraints there and what we can use as viable agricultural space. And we thought that by using the concepts around urban farming, around vertical farming, using the vacant and derelict land, that we could open up a lot of the kind of waste and brownfield sites to a more industrial focus, to take it slightly away from the community food growing. But that would be with an intention to bring those communities into our food policy and into this industrial approach. We've done some very brief surveys on this regarding the viability, the business model almost. And we can see in some cases that with a substantial increase in greenhousing and urban farming and vertical farming, we could, bring around 600 full-time jobs to the city initially. And also, that would really impact community groups, it would impact small businesses, it would impact social enterprises. And it would also give us the opportunity to kind of explore alternative ways of employment within the city. One of the things that we're really quite interested in is Glasgow has been for many years known as a cooperative city, and we've got around 20 cooperatives working in the city, and it's something that we think the food system could enable, that type of worker cooperative, to bring real social inclusion to communities and have that resilience built into the communities, not just from a security of supply regarding food, but also the economic impact of that food system as well. There are challenges to this though, obviously, and the internal processes and structures that we've came across with internally shows that I don't think this would be a secret to anybody who operates within a local authority. There are internal pressures around working processes that create a lack of flexibility and agility in the way we can access infrastructure, funding, the way in which we can navigate the bureaucratic elements of the actual local authority. So it's something that we need to try to create this a new way of thinking, and hopefully the policies around the circular economy and the climate emergency implementation plan that will drive through that thinking, becoming more agile in the way in which we approach kind of more non-traditional ways of project building within the city. And obviously we know that by regenerating the environment, it goes a long way to regenerate our own society. And that's one of the main aspects of our circular economy, where we've based it on the concepts around sustainability, where it's not just about the economy itself, but it's tied in intrinsically with the environment and with our citizens as well, and their well-being. If you want to move on. So really the main challenges that I've found over the past few months, and they are still enduring just now, I haven't managed to negotiate my way past many of them at this moment in time, is access to land. And you think that with the amount of vacant and derelict land in the city, that we've got the infrastructure there, as in we've got the land, we've got that availability for us to access that in some capacity. But the way in which it's done is actually it's restricted through different constraints that have been applied to that land over the previous years, through development plans, city development plans within the planning system in the city. So we have got an issue where a lot of land is locked. It's almost being banked for future development and future, especially future development around residential development to increase the population of the city itself. However, there's many sites within the city that have lain vacant for upwards of 40 years and need to be reactivated in some capacity. And the good thing about urban farming, I can see, is in many cases that is an opportunity to have something that can actually be dismantled. It can be portable in some capacity, and that land can still retain its development potential, but also in the meantime be used almost as a stalled space for it to be activated for urban farming. Changing mindsets within the organisation is something that we are trying to do. We're trying to go through various capacity building training courses to identify the opportunities within the council and to bring forward a new way of thinking, to create a more flexible and agile manner in which we can approach the concepts around the circular economy itself. And I suppose the collaborative approach, we've spoken to various external groups about helping to fund or helping to activate some of these projects. However, we're slightly unsure about the financial or the legal aspects of it. There is an intention and a willingness within our own organisation to retain a form of ownership and maybe look at, as I said previously, a different and an alternative way to provide employment and provide that way into work. So the idea of around, maybe franchise, maybe using the council as the main owner, the main driver and developer, and having that as a security blanket for the next decade or so, and then to franchise that to workers' cooperatives or to community groups might be something that we would be more interested in rather than having it run by a private group itself. So there's like the capital and revenue funding issue as well, about how to get it started and how to ensure that it continues and is viable economically for the city as well. So I think that really covers, most of the issues that I wanted to speak about regarding the food system, but it's really mainly about how to activate it, and how to really get unlock that potential that we've got in Glasgow for the food growing systems. So hopefully hopefully it makes sense, and hope you understood me.
Yes, Colin, thank you very much. We understand you very well. And it's really interesting the way you envision the project and your work as a vehicle to achieve social integrations, social cohesion, as well as creating other co-benefits such as job creation, biodiversity, so on and so forth. And the challenges you have outlined here, I'm sure other cities, such as Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Essen, and Dortmund, they might also have experienced similar challenges. And today is the occasion we can really share those experiences and discuss those barriers and obstacles. But for now, allow me to welcome the next speaker. We will go to Bonn in Germany. So my colleagues, Mario and Gernat, will share with us the Practitioner Handbook for Circular Food Systems we have developed here at ICLEI. So this handbook, it offers guidance to support city officers, first in identify practical circular economy intervention in collaboration with different kind of stakeholders. So precisely the collaborative work and challenge you have just mentioned, Collins. So with different kind of stakeholder from business, academia, civil society, and more. So floor is yours, Mariam.
Thank you, Yingxi, and hello, everyone. So I'm a senior officer at the ICLEI World Secretariat. I've met a few of you already. I specializing in circular food systems at the World Secretariat. As was already mentioned, it's a usual entry point to the circular economy because it's not only linked to substantial resource consumption, it's also something that local governments can maybe more easily influence than, let's say, plastics or construction, and that residents connect to easily. And there are very large ambitions behind circular food system, but what we've seen is that often they translate on the ground into incremental initiative, mostly focused on recovery, urban agriculture, sharing, and that there's not necessarily a red thread binding these initiatives, which we think would support access to funding, securing political buy-in, and collaborative working relationships with colleagues from other departments. So what we endeavored to do is to build on our experience on food systems through diverse projects around the world to kind of identify if a local government really wanted to implement a fully fledged circular food system from farm to fork along the value chain, what would be necessary and what are good practices from our network. So we've looked closely at over 50 good practices from around the world linked to circular food system to draw learnings and a methodology. And our main message linked to this, if you go to the next slide, is that there are many ways in which a local government can support circular food system, and they don't necessarily have to do with initiatives that will need funding. They can be linked to aspects that the local government can regulate, raise awareness, convene, tax differently, and that it's important to map these aspects and to see, okay, for different elements that we would like to change in the food system in the city, what is the most relevant lever? So within the handbook, we looked at 3 main interventions, supporting regenerative farming, diminishing food waste, and supporting local value chain, and looked at kind of what are the tools local government can use and what are good examples of these. And if you go to the next slide, this could be done along different strategies that support more circular food systems, because some of you might not be familiar with the concept. To quickly go through it, when we talk about circular food system, we're talking about, at least at ICLEI, about 5 main strategies, which when implemented together allow a local government to address the full food value chain. The first is rethinking how and where food production and consumption is consumed and governed and managed in the city. What are lock-in situations that are created by specific processes? How is the linear economy supported by the city? The second one, which Colin really emphasized, is regenerating local and regional ecosystem that support or are linked to the food system, and ensuring that local food activities are powered by renewable resources. And then we get into the usual R that local governments usually focus on, and that's reducing food waste and loss, but across life cycle, and supporting more sustainable and local consumption and production of food. Reusing through sharing platforms and new business model, and recovering organic waste, and most importantly, ensuring that what is recovered is actually re-enters production processes. And if you go to the next slide, what I wanted to take you through today is kind of examples from cities, most are actually industrial legacy cities, of how this looks like in practice, to kind of expand the horizon and imagine what it would look like if a city would implement circular food strategy from farm to fork, building on examples that actually exist. So the first one, thinking about rethinking the systems, the food system to support circularity. There we found a lot of examples of cities that have set up very collaborative task force or governance mechanism to identify what would be relevant intervention in the food system, and that this is key to the success of these interventions because it creates buy-in. One interesting example from Baltimore is the Food Policy Action Coalition, which is both interdepartmental task force, but also engages citizens, research, community initiative to propose to Baltimore interventions that would support the food system sustainability. Another interesting initiative from Industrial Legacy City in Belgium, from Bruges, who launched in 2015 the Food Lab, which is a platform where local stakeholders from different sectors are invited to create food guidelines for the cities. And this was quite successful because what the Food Lab started focusing on is creating guidelines for healthcare institutions to decrease food waste. And they started working with 2 healthcare institutions and tested these methodologies, adapted them, and now they are used by all healthcare institutions in the city. If we look more at regenerative practices, next slide, I wanted to mention 2 interesting initiatives. One is from the city of Paris in France. They've started an initiative called Pariculteur, which is issuing basically tenders for sustainable urban agriculture projects across 100 hectares in the city that are currently underused. So for instance, an underground parking lot of 3,500 square meters was turned into a mushroom farm. But there are also smaller scale projects like in Bonn, where we're based, where there's like local community initiatives have been using a public building to test out an aquaponic system that would use soils. And the reason for this is that usually aquaponic is in water and it doesn't use soil, and therefore it can't have access to organic certification or EcoCert. So they wanted to test out how to use soils in production, and they were very successful. And so the city is looking at how to scale this. If you go to the next slide, in reduce, so this is essentially reducing resource inputs and waste outputs, both from a consumption perspective and production perspective. If we look on the production side, it can have to do with supporting shorter food chain, because that decreases the emissions related to food transport, and also supports more regenerative farming production in the city region. And there we've seen a number of local governments providing training support, capacity building to local food businesses or farmers, such as in Ede and Barneveld in the Netherlands. But from the consumption side, a local government can also support a shift to diets that are less resource intensive, so more plant-based diet, less wasteful diets, such as the Thursday Veggie Day from Ghent. I would really recommend having a look at Ghent's food policy in general, because it's very collaborative, it's really all-encompassing, really integrated. And if you go to the next slide, for reuse, there what's interesting is that often we look only at the consumption side, but reuse can also be supported on the production side, for instance, by promoting a group ownership of machinery or storage facilities through cooperatives or other collaboration mechanisms. So for instance, in Beijing, in China, the municipality created the Municipal Agricultural and Rural Bureau, which assisted local farmers in connecting them with inputs enterprises, so they could facilitate joint or shared purchases and lower cost, which was really instrumental in getting through the COVID crisis and securing access to food. And on the consumption side, one really interesting example at the district level from Milan is how they set up platform to redistribute unsold products from supermarkets, corporate canteen, and really acted as a platform to link them to food aid organization. And they managed to save 77 tons of food in the first year. So now they're expanding to other districts. And the last one is Recover, which is maybe the most well-known R of the 5. So there are both examples in terms of supporting business innovation. I know Glasgow did a lot of these strategies. So for instance, in Volta Redonda in Brazil, the municipality set up a program to recover old oils, old cooking oil, to be reprocessed for reuse as biodiesel, and support job creation in the city. But there are also other ways to support Recover from a municipality perspective, such as connecting food market to a compost facility, such as in Hebron in Palestine. So all these different examples really show that there are a multiple of role a local government can play in supporting circular food system, from urban planner to regulator to convener. But all these initiatives have also three things in common. If you go to the next the next slide, I've given it away. First, it's the need for space, be it to try out things, to pilot technologies, to store food products when they are being shared between producers and consumers, or just to meet. The other things that they have in common is that they rely on a strong engagement of communities, as was also mentioned before. And finally, they all, to some extent, deliver social benefits, which was also a strong point from Colin, that is a reason why a lot of cities engage in food system transformation in circular food systems. If you go to the next slide, just to focus on the space element, that's something, oh, maybe a slide is missing, no. That there are a lot of barriers in accessing this space, both because when space is used for food production, there are a lot of regulatory hurdle linked to health risk that have to be addressed. Of course, space is a scarce resource, so there are competing usages. There's a lot of bureaucracy linked to this and a lack of access to funding. What we've heard from cities that have been successful in allocating space for circular food system initiative was the importance of securing political buy-in by demonstrating the co-benefits. That's also what, Colin, you were emphasizing when linking it to biodiversity or climate action. And this really requires then a citywide strategy on food and a task force that works on it across departments. The second thing is COVID showed us that we can do things online as well. Of course, it shouldn't be used always, because it's also maybe less conducive of having community links, but there are instances in which digital platforms really facilitate the work, so they could be leveraged. And the last kind of feedback we heard is that there's a need for very clear processes for accessing space to overcome bureaucracy hurdle. And I think we'll hear a bit in the next presentation about how to set up such clear processes. That was it from me, but if you want to have more information, you can access the handbook and reach out to me as well. I will link it in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion, for sharing different circular strategy for the food system, as well as very interesting cases from the world. I think it's also reflect very well to Colin's presentation, especially regarding the need for space, the need to create co-benefits. And also, you also, but at the end of your presentation, you also allude to some potential creative solutions. So here I would like to make sure of one thing, since today's session is more of a discussion session, which means, so we really see this as an internal discussion, which means we will not make today's session public. So it's mainly for internal free discussion among us. So please do feel free to ask questions anytime by simply jumping in or put in your question in the chat box so we can collect them and help you to address those questions. So before I move on to the next presentation, maybe I give it a little bit time for the audience. Perhaps you have questions for Colin's presentations or Marion's presentation, or Colin's maybe have some question want to ask for Marion for some particular area in the presentations. Do we have comments from the audience or question?
Hi, Yingqi. Yeah, just to thank Marion for that presentation. I thought that was really helpful. It's far more structured than my own presentation. Made far more sense. I think I was interested in some of the just the processes around convincing that narrative around what a circular food system is. I think that's an important aspect to the conversation to get buy-in. We've got good political buy-in. there's a lot of politicians who are, especially the local elected politicians, who are really keen to see something like this happen within, especially within their wards, because it activates not just the environment and the local community, it actually activates their electorate as well. So they have got they've got an understanding of the benefits for themselves and for the community. However, I think that conversation would be really important when it comes to the interdepartmental stuff, and it's that crossing the silo working, the barriers within our own organisation, to really understand that we need to be far more open to these types of these types of developments, these types of projects, because waiting forever for a massive commercial input into the city for a huge new office building or a new set of commercial developments, we could wait forever for that, and in the meantime we've got all this space that's lying vacant, and it's really it's a detriment to the city, and it's also a detriment to the citizens, and it's something that we could really, access and really activate and really make a difference in that social arena.
Definitely, I think it would be worthwhile to connect to Baltimore on this and on their departmental task force. I think there was really good work there.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
Colin, we'd be happy to talk about that. Sorry, go ahead, Ying.
yeah, this is I was just about to give the floor to you. So for our next speaker, we will travel, of course, to Baltimore in the US. So Eva Richardson, who is the sustainability manager in the Department of Planning, would like to. Yes, perfect. So the floor is yours, Eva, please.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ying. And I'm actually going to pass things over to my colleague, Abby Cock, and she's going to talk about some of the work that has been done around the city regarding reviving urban spaces. But just wanted to thank both Marion and Colin for their presentations. Saw a lot of intersections that's happening on the other side of the pond, so to speak. But thank you so much for having us and featuring our work. And I'll go ahead and pass things off to Abby.
Thank you so much, Ava, and thank you again to Colin and Marion, to everyone here. It's a real honor to join you all from Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States of America, where we're facing the exact same issues that you are. And in fact, there's a monthly call for urban agriculture coordinators and directors in municipalities across the country that Kate Lee, the urban agriculture director for Washington, D.C., started last year. And we had a conversation just a couple of days ago with a representative from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the federal, Ag Bureau, about the difficulty in accessing land, despite the fact that we have so much of it and that it causes so many problems. The difficulty in, once you've accessed it, holding on to it and not losing it to other economic forces, gentrification, and finding funding, all that stuff. I'm going to put something in the chat related to health risks. Amazing study done by the Johns Hopkins University Center for a Livable Future on soil safety that may be of interest to you all. Basically, they found that our soils were overwhelmingly safe for growing. But I'm going to try and keep this short, but give you all a little bit of the flavor of what's going on here. And then Ava will take it from there to talk about some broader food systems work. So the piece that I have any expertise on is using our vacant land for urban agriculture. Next slide. I'm going to blow through these pretty quickly. So we have approximately 30,000 vacant properties in Baltimore City, of which about half are vacant lots and half are vacant structures. And by lots, if we're using different terminology, I mean open space. The city only owns about a quarter of them. which is a big barrier to us doing anything with them. And the patterns of where they're located, you can see clearly they're very, very clustered, are in historically Black and low-income neighborhoods impacted by lack of investments and over-enforcements and other social ills. And there are thousands more of these vacant lots to be created in the coming years as more and more of these structures are torn down because they've become hazards. Next slide. So obviously we see the potential too to turn these spaces into other solutions. Next slide. Rather than just waiting, as you say, for the next big office building, which isn't necessarily what people want to need in our smaller city these days anyway. Next slide. So this is a map of the food producing urban farms and community gardens in Baltimore City. As you can see, they're real spread out. Unsurprisingly, a lot of them are in the neighborhoods with the greatest amount of vacant space, but there's a lot of room to be doing more. And in the next slide, these are the urban farm businesses in the city, if you can see those little orange dots, just to give you a sense. Next slide, please. And these you can just blow through. Ava just wanted to give some examples of different types of community gardens and urban farms and projects that blend those two things that are happening in our city. But it's a really robust situation. And if you're interested, I'll put another link into the chat. FarmAllianceBaltimore.org is a great way to start getting to know some of them if that's something you wanted to do. So our office, of course, works on policies, programs, and actions across different sectors. And if you want to know more about what we're doing in this field, go to our website. Under projects, you can find urban agriculture and get a lot more detail. We have an urban agriculture plan for the city that we put out in 2013 with major policy recommendations. We've also created policies and plans around, you can go to the next slide, reuse of vacant lots more broadly. I'm just blow through these, trying to stick to my 5 minutes, but looking at, in depth, what are the regulations, what are the resources for all these different types of greening projects. Created this green network plan where we zoomed in on some areas of the city that need the most investments. And we're looking at how to do workforce development around those sites with agriculture as one piece of that. Next slide, please. And in our 2019 sustainability plan, which you can also find on our website, and you can blow through the next couple of slides. I think I actually put the pages up there. We go into detail about our vision for a city where communities that have been historically excluded from access to land and to fresh, healthy, culturally appropriate foods are the ones that benefit most from urban agriculture activities. I haven't got much into what we're actually doing, but we give access to our vacant land as we can to community groups for free through this Adopt a Lot program. Next slide. We have a land leasing program that we run in partnership with the Baltimore Housing Department, which controls most of the vacant land that the city owns, and have done a handful of like 5 to 7 year leases. It's been difficult to make those work and then to get them to stick, but we have managed to get some good projects going and get them some security. Next slide. Some of the major areas that we've worked on, and again, you'll find more detail about all this stuff on our website if you're interested, is zoning and permitting, what types of animals you can keep, tax credits for urban farms, getting people access to water, and then building reasonable standards for soil safety, which we updated recently based on that great work from Johns Hopkins. And other areas that we want to get more into in the future are indoor growing, not just having goals and visions around equity, but specific policies, engaging more with the immigrant and refugee community, and looking at cannabis production, which was legalized in our state a few years ago and is benefiting people outside of our area, but not currently within the city. And next and last slide. Yeah, that's me, if you wanted to catch up and where you can find us. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm gonna pass it over to Ava.
All right, thank you, Abby. And in addition to the work that Abby spoke to around supporting and advancing urban agriculture, particularly as a way to mitigate some of the vacant land in the city, I just want to draw on some of the similarities that I saw in your talk, Colin, when it came to like as a post-industrial city dealing with vacant land. We deal with a lot of those challenges here in Baltimore City. We were working for about 2 years or 2.5 years now with the Natural Resource Defense Council as a part of their Food Matters program to expand food waste reduction infrastructure across the city. That program really helped us implement some of the main strategies within our food waste and recovery strategy. And it's been really just a robust program, and we've seen some really amazing intersections as it relates to food systems, climate justice, waste management, as well as addressing kind of the need for compost as it relates to healthier soils. But I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Natalia now, so she can speak more to her work as it relates to the Food Matters program. So Natalia.
Hello, so like Ava mentioned, I'm working with the Food Matters program. We are doing a lot of work with food recovery, as well as composting is a big thing that we're doing right now. So on this slide, it is a program that we like to show people to help understand what is equity and how is food a part of that? Why is it important for everyone to have access to food and for everyone to have access to the idea of reducing food waste? So we're going to go to the next slide. Compost in-person services such as food scrap drop-off locations. One of the ways that we're doing that are farmers markets. So we partner with a couple of local farmers markets to collect food scraps. Using this model, residents drop off their food scraps at the booth and farmers then use it to compost or feed to animals. There are some small community groups that also do that, but doing it with the city shows that we are involved and help us use it to educate people. And so through a recent food scrap drop-off pilot, we're using a grant to provide a food scrap drop-off service at residential convenience centers. This increases availability because many people don't live near a farmer's market or can't drive all the way over there. And some just didn't have knowledge that the program existed. And this, so doing it at the convenience centers not only increases the amount of drop-off spots, but also allows more people to have access. It's proven to be popular with the residents, showing that they are interested in reducing their food waste, and it is a good idea to invest in things like this. So far, in only 4 months, we've collected 1,024 pounds of food scraps, about half a ton, and the usage is increasing each month. So this is a map of the community composting sites that we have so far, which is just growing every year as we get the resources to include more. So as mentioned before, there's food scrap recycling at farmers markets where we partner with them to educate residents as well as reduce the amount of food scraps that go into the landfill. So the food recovery hierarchy mentions that it's important to provide source reduction, which is basically reducing the volume of surplus food that's generated, and feed hungry people. So donate extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, and shelters before you turn to feeding animals and composting, which is what we're doing with the previously mentioned program. So here we're partnering with Maryland's Food Bank Middle Mile program, which was sorry, I apologize, which includes the Meal Connect application. It's fast and easy to use. You can simply send a link to someone and they can take a look at it themselves. It's supported by a network of volunteers, and it's proven instrumental during the COVID-19 response because it's contact-free. It's shown to have 36,000 pounds rescued in 3 months. So some other ways that we take part in food waste reduction is education using social media, including a monthly webinar to educate residents about hands-on strategies to reduce their food waste at home. It's proven helpful basically through like surveys with residents, hands-on flyers and things like that, that they are sort of getting the message and they do want to be more hands-on in their own homes in reducing food waste. And these are some of this is from one thing that we do is we connect with the community. This is a local artist who was able to put together these flyers, which do go out online to show on social media to show people some ideas of what it means to reduce food waste.
And just to say a quick word about this particular kind of like educational campaign, it was really building off a campaign that happened during the kind of like early 1900s that really focused on the country reducing food waste as a part of the war effort. And a lot of those scraps were given to farmers, but resources were so limited. Food was a really precious resource at that time. And we really appreciated the aesthetic and the message that was communicated there, but there was a whole like few bureaus specifically focused on reducing waste. And so we tried in some small way to capture the essence of some of that, just to add that, but sorry, Natalia.
No worries. I love knowing I remembered, but wasn't quite able to capture the way you were, the idea behind the artwork, which is really important. So this is an example of a flyer that we would give someone or send to someone online, just some tips to reduce food waste and, as mentioned, save money. And it's very helpful for residents to connect like the two things because for some people, the saving money is a stronger idea than just why should I buy less food or why should I be more careful about my leftovers. Thank you so much.
All right. So I guess, Ying, I don't know if we want to open it up for questions now, but
yes. So first, I of course like to thank you so much, Eva, Natalia, and Abby, for such amazing and diverse projects in your cities. I guess for sure a lot of us have questioned already or want to know more of certain area of your project. So I would just open up the floor and just please jump in and tell us who you are and what is your question or comment. Do feel free.
I guess I'll just start it off real quick. Hi, this is John
Please.
Gordon from Newark, and I wanted to say thank you so much to Baltimore. Your presentation is very inspiring to other cities, and I encourage you all to, when you get the chance to visit Baltimore and see their work. I fortunately took a tour a few years ago, and it was really great. During the Vacant Property Conference. One of the things I found interesting between the Scotland, Glasgow presentation in Baltimore is that you all spoke about indoor growing and how we will see changes in labor and changes of availability of food growing, specifically in the United States and like California, where the drought has major impacts. And we're going to possibly need to rely more and more on indoor growing. How have you found the public's reaction to that idea and the government's idea on zoning and that kind of work?
Go ahead, Abby.
Yeah. So John, thank you so much. I would say that because our urban agriculture efforts really started around this idea of addressing the vacant land problem, it has not been a focus for us in almost any way. That said, people are doing it, indoor growing, and I would say there is increasing interest in it because a lot of our vacant land can feel kind of illusory, like it's there, but it's very hard to access, as we've been discussing. So I was just talking the other day to this group of high school interns in this youth sustainability leadership program that we have, about the idea of doing, it's not indoor growing exactly, but a model like Green Roof for growing food at a school, where they could work with younger students and partner with local business. So we're very interested, as I said in my presentation, at looking at our regulations, because we know that at the time that we wrote them, we were really thinking about outdoor operations. And so indoor agriculture is allowed as like a light industrial use in our city, which is much more limited than the areas where you could do a open air, like in the ground farm business, which is a conditional use in almost all zones in the city, which means it's possible, you just have to go through a process. So yeah, we're thinking hard about it. So far, it hasn't risen to like a crisis level where there's somebody who really wants to do something who cannot do it, you know, it's able to push through and work with us to change it. That's probably what it will take, to be completely honest, but hopefully we'll get ahead of it before then.
And just to add a note about that, John, I know that like, and I'm assuming kind of this also relates to like aquaponics and aquaculture in general. And I think part of a lot of the indoor growing infrastructure, it requires so much seed money to start when it comes to having the lights and, you know, having the proper engineering system set up. And I think also it kind of suggests that we know better than nature, we can do better than nature. Food has been grown in soil for a long time. And I do understand as land becomes more scarce, you know, we do have to think of like innovative ways. And I think indoor growing and some of these new technologies are certainly a really, they're an appealing alternative. And I think they will be a part of some of the solutions that we take moving forward. But I think it's also critical to like just further assess kind of like the real implications of that and like drill a little deeper and ask like more questions about it. But yeah, I visit Newark, excuse me, often. So yeah, I'm not sure like the specific kind of like challenges you all are facing, but we'd love to learn more about you all's work in New Jersey. So yeah.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. You mentioned indoor growing of or outdoor growing of cannabis as like a way of stimulating the economy. One of the things that I've done in the past in community gardens that I've been involved in was I actually grew tobacco plants. Actually, what happened was when you plant sunflowers near a tobacco plant, the tobacco plant attracts ladybugs and you'll get an infestation. And the infestation of the ladybugs then, once they evolve, will then go and eat all your other insects on your other plants. And then by the end of the season, you have a whole leaf tobacco. So I did it for the infestation reason, to be able to mitigate non-beneficial insects in the garden. But as we look at the market of cannabis and other things that people are left out of, whole leaf tobacco, when sold on the market, is not taxed and regulated the same as processed tobacco. And as people consume cannabis, you know, it's a more natural alternative than processed paper for consuming that cannabis. So that's another thing to think about in that kind of operation. Generally speaking, tobacco, boo, but there's other interesting things. Thank you.
That's super interesting. Thank you, John. I have not heard, like I brought it up once or twice as almost a joke, but I haven't heard anyone really in Baltimore talk seriously about growing tobacco, but I'd love to, yeah, let's catch up. Want to know more.
Great discussion. I think it's opened up very nicely to our discussion session. So for community growing projects, what are the advantage and disadvantage of variety of potential sites? For example, city center is better, or should we start it with using derelict sites, or should it be placed in the middle of neighborhoods, rooftop, or public space events? So I'm sure all of us, a lot of us, has urban growing project in our city. So I would like to hear, how do you approach this question of location strategically, or it come naturally in your city? So just if you have any comments, please come in to this question. In the meantime, I would share my screen again. So here I prepare a few guiding questions for us to kick up the discussion, especially on several practical areas. The first is about location of such a project. Second is about regulatory and planning barrier. And of course, how to access to finance or funding scheme, how to engage with private sector, as well as community or different type of stakeholders. So I would suggest we can come in and just pick one area and share with us your experience or perhaps your particular concern on that area. How do you see that?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think an urban farm in the city center would be really cool as a demonstration project and to raise awareness, and is kind of exactly what we need, but very, very difficult to do because land is so highly valued there. Our focus through things like the Green Network Plan that I mentioned earlier is in distressed neighborhoods, impact investment areas, historically disadvantaged neighborhoods, however you want to say it. Because of that vision, we have about using that vacant land, you know, transforming it from a problem to an opportunity, giving the greatest share that we can of opportunities to people who've been most disenfranchised, et cetera, et cetera. I put into the chat a Google Drive link. It'll take you to this community control of land report that was put out by the Farm Alliance of Baltimore, which is a membership network for the urban farms that do sales in the city, and by the Black Yield Institute, which is a locally developed nonprofit that is now also working regionally and nationally around food system issues, both urban agriculture, community-owned grocery stores, and raising awareness generally. But they talk a lot in there about the need to have use of land be a community-driven process. And so that's a big next area for us. We're putting together new community engagement guidelines and really thinking about how to have these conversations, because it's not necessarily the case that every neighborhood that has low access to food and a high availability of vacant land wants to see new community gardens and urban farms in their neighborhoods for a lot of complex reasons. So we really need to be having those conversations.
Yeah, I think to that point, some of the most sometimes it's not necessarily about like the type, but it's really about like the engagement and the co-design approach, ensuring that community members who are impacted by whatever kind of infrastructure or urban agriculture that is recommended, that there is buy-in from that community, that they are able to contribute to the decisions around how it is set up, and that there is some community benefit that stems from it. And I think oftentimes, to Abby's point about, you know, some people don't want community gardens in their community because oftentimes the momentum and the excitement may be there at the beginning, then it becomes an eyesore, and and it can be hard to maintain some of these projects, especially if the funding wanes, or again, general participation kind of levels off after a while. So I think really being critical about like how those communities that are impacted and surrounding some of those either gardens or urban farms are able to support and be involved is really critical.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that you know, where people feel abandoned and that there is a need for more traditional development in terms of fixing up homes, putting in a grocery store, things like that. It's hard for folks who aren't already, for their own personal reasons, really invested in food systems and agriculture work to see why that should be a priority. Like, maybe it's not a terrible thing, but why should we put our energy there, you know, as opposed to continuing to push for these really fundamental things that feel more transformative. So having better relations and investment in our neighborhoods generally will allow us to do more urban agriculture if we do it in such a way that it's not solely driven by market forces.
Often find that trying to achieve consensus within community groups is one of the most difficult aspects. There's always competing agendas at play there, and that's always something that creates an inertia itself, you know, just by that competing forces within different groups. But I think you're right about community empowerment. Community empowerment is really important to us as well. But we can also see personally, I can also see the main issues behind that, because you do get the momentum at the beginning, the people who are interested, they want to take it forward, but once they leave that program, it's how that then translates to future years. And I suppose for me, the the main element around that would be to have it as a job creation where there's an actual employment around it and not just a volunteer scheme. I think that then makes it much more impactful because people actually have got that community wealth building aspect then within their area. Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Colin. I think it's reflect quite well. You mentioned earlier about Glasgow as a corporate city. And through the example from Baltimore, we also see how do they set up kind of localized, let's say, production of value chain in terms of food productions. So they have mentioned about, so it's not only about an urban farm there, but as well as grocery shops. So the question for everyone is, we can discuss here is how can we fund such an urban scheme and to create sustainability of such a project by, for example, introduce sort of cooperative mechanism or business model to go along with projects. So again, I'll open up the floor. I see Rebecca has raised her hand, so please, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you, Ing. I'm sorry. I just wanted to come back to one of the questions that were initially posed, the example for cross-departmental task force, or the need that Colin had flagged that this could be something that would help to overcome these administrative processes. And I know that there are people from the city of Dortmund here, and I just wanted to reach out directly and ask, because as I understand, there is something like this going on, like the new food work is kind of connected between different departments in the city. So maybe some of the Dortmund people would like to come in, and maybe Alessa, and just explain a little bit about the work in Dortmund and how this is, set up between different departments. Thanks.
I'm not sure Alessa is, hello? Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know, Alessa is not talking, so I'm just getting in. I just need the question once again, because I didn't quite get what you wanted to hear of it, because it's about the Ernährungsrat. Are you asking this?
Thanks, Gabriele, and great that you're here. Maybe there are two parts to my questions. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about your work, since this can be relevant. Part one would be how this is set up between different departments in Dortmund. I understand it's kind of, there is not such a thing like a food or a sustainability department working on that alone, but it's like people from different departments are connected. And maybe the second is if you share just a few examples on your community work, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Right now we are at the beginning of some new strategic programs, because we have a new action plan which will be hopefully signed in November this year. We have been analyzing all the data of our food system and what we have to do to change in order to get our climate protection on top. And we have 5 strategic actions. One of them is to change the urban agriculture or the food system as such, but coming to your question, the problem is that our 5 different actions are so divided that we need so different people to in our government to address this. And right now we just from the climate protection department, we just addressed all the problems and have a real good strategic plan. But we when we in November we get the signed plan, so that we can actually get some resources like money and people to get it done. Then we actually can get other parts departments of the local government to actually enforce it. Right now it's a little bit, everybody does a little bit, but formally we don't work together, but we know what the other ones do, and when we get in November, we get the signed approval and the resources, we can actually build a new task force. Alessa, is Alessa hearing it? Is she? Does she want to say something to it?
Yeah, maybe she's not available at the moment.
Yeah.
But maybe thank you, Gabriele, for sharing. Maybe yeah, somebody else would also like to share some of the experience with this interdepartmental work, because that seems to be a crucial point, kind of how to overcome silos on that work in the administration.
Yeah, I can say for Baltimore, sort of the genesis of interdepartmental collaboration around agriculture for us was between the planning and housing departments, as I mentioned. In planning, we have the sustainability plans and goals around agriculture, and in housing, they were controlling all the vacant land and were very interested in more solutions of things that could be done with it. So that was a very natural partnership. We have a monthly coordination meeting that's kind of for green sites generally. Very logistics focused with them, that has come to include Department of Public Works around water access and permitting issues, and folks from a couple of other agencies at this point. Our new mayoral administration has very strong goals around increasing the number of gardens and farms. And there's a Baltimore Food Policy Initiative that's also part of the Department of Planning that looks at issues related to food access. So even beyond all the food issues we've talked about today, they're looking at things like how people can access government benefits around food at higher levels, get sort of double their value at the farmers markets, more healthy fresh food in corner stores, things like that. And they are interested in creating even a broader interdepartmental group, not to work just on these logistical issues of what's happening with this particular site or how this particular rule is being applied, but how do we develop a broader vision for how we could implement these administration goals, and not have it just be a site-by-site thing.
Thank you very much, Abby. Do we have other comments? I think we have touched on various subtopic here about the location of the projects, how do we overcome regulatory barriers involving different stakeholders, engage with public. We haven't actually touched on the topic of how to engage with private sector. For example, in any of your experience, have you ever outreach to company or private sector and sort of discuss what kind of collaborative project can they work together with such an urban food system projects in any of your experience? No?
I'll just say from the Baltimore end, this is something we want to do more of and that we're actively having conversations about. We've had businesses reach out to us ranging from the very, very small and local, like literally a little flower store on a corner in a neighborhood that wanted to do more and had good ideas, to a big, big developer for this whole sort of like abandoned neighborhood and in South Baltimore that wanted to look at how they could, you know, basically put a big shiny sticker in the window of their businesses saying, we are officially being sustainable, you know, we're composting, we're doing XYZ. And we're definitely looking at businesses in terms of food rescue, as was mentioned in one of the presentations earlier, how we can get extra food from grocery stores, because there's a very, very strong community-based network of food redistribution in the city that we can tie right into. So we're thinking about this stuff. Have we really done it? Not so much.
Yes, Gordon.
I just like to quickly interject. We've been blessed in Newark to receive Whole Cities Foundation grants from Whole Foods for our community gardens. And Whole Cities program, you know, a community garden will get somewhere around like 10,000. Some cases, I even think $40,000 of investment over a number of years to build up the infrastructure of those community gardens. Coming from a different community, my mind was just blown when I saw that kind of level of support for individual community gardens to build out the shade structures, to install the water lines, the things that create the ability for someone to really feel like they're how do I put it? I've always found that community gardens that don't get that kind of level of support of being able to have shade structures and what's the word I always used, infrastructure assets that make the use of that space more pleasant and less burdensome. I kind of had a question for you in Baltimore about the issues that you ran into with your 5-year leases. We're looking at growing our leases. And has that really benefited the use of those spaces, or have you run into bigger problems?
What a good question. So we did the first of these leases in 2012 and 2013. And those were both for 1.5 acre parcels, sort of big square interblock areas in disinvested neighborhoods, being run by nonprofits with a presence in the area, you know, for purposes of workforce training. And the one was very focused on getting food out to people, and the other was more focused on you know, selling to restaurants and work, you know, providing opportunities for job training to folks returning from incarceration. But both now have reached the end of their lease terms. And there was like a 5-year lease and then a 2-year, you know, notice to vacate period if the lease wasn't being renewed. And in both cases, we found that there's significant conflict, disagreements, you know, within the neighborhood, as you were talking about. Around, maybe as Colin mentioned, but yeah, around what to do with the land. And in both cases, actually, neighborhood leaders are saying what we would really like to see is a grocery store here. And our housing and planning department folks are saying, you don't think we've tried, you know, to get a grocery store to come into the city? We're trying all the time. Like, we can't necessarily do that. And so there's this tension, and the site managers, of course, want to point to all the good work they've done and are feeling very wounded, and they're like, we can't operate without this lack of security, you know, give us a new lease or don't, but please do. And it's sort of exactly, you know, what we could have, you know, anticipated would be the case when we first were doing these leases. You know, you sort of know that this is going to be an issue down the line. So we are figuring that out now, but, you know, agriculture stakeholders, people doing the work on the ground, have been very clear to us, you know, this was fine when it was better than absolutely nothing, you know, to see agriculture as an interim land use that you can do in 5-year increments, or that is movable even, because, you know, we want to think that it is. And in some cases it may be, you know, depending on how you set it up and if you have the resources to help with such a move. But a lot of these projects are very rooted in you know, the person who lives 2 doors down who's super committed to the project, or the neighborhood kids, you know, or get really involved, and you can't really just move that somewhere else. So yeah, people have been very clear to us that they want to see long-term land protection, whether that's in a land trust or conservation easement, or whether it's via sales, which is a really interesting and tricky set of questions to navigate, because on the one hand, you know, we're talking about providing benefits to people who've been historically disenfranchised by lack of access to land. And so if we're not actually giving them the value of the land that then they can hold for their family and sell if they want or need to, you know, then it's not really equitable. But on the other hand, if we're saying we want to have these assets be long-term in the community, moving them into private ownership is very scary. So we're feeling out all those things, but those are some of our issues.
Two of the things, one last thing, I want to give a shout out to also the work that Baltimore has done in reforesting neighborhoods. I remember that was a really cool thing that I saw on that tour. It's not food related, but it's food for the critters within our community. Another thing was in New Jersey, we use Green Acres funding, or we have the option of using Green Acres funding to preserve space for parks, but you can also use it for community gardens. And what that does is you use that funding, and then all of a sudden that land is preserved. And the other cool part is you're able to then purchase property with that money, and you're able to put shade structures, sheds, and install water lines, maybe even run electricity to it if it's a really hustling and bustling space. A mentor of mine, she did this 20 years ago. She did it on smaller ones and larger ones. So like if it was like a 2-lot vacant space, those have survived 20 years easily. The larger ones are the ones that always run into issues I've found too. But yeah, sorry.
Sorry, thanks for mentioning John and Abby. I just wanted to come in here to give that back to Colin, because I understand that exactly this question of like, how do you make this project into either long-term land use, or what do you do with like interim or short-term use, is something that was really critical for you as well, Colin, if I understood you correctly in our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's creating that trust in the community, creating that trust with any of the groups that you try to put a development in place with. I suppose, you know, regarding the engagement with the private sector, in that sense, that's slightly difficult for me at the moment to really expand on that, just because we are conscious that in many cases, working in sustainability, as you'll probably know, that the financial models are not, you know, the financial models and financial financing of non-traditional types of activities doesn't usually create a lot of interest because of the lack of return. And it's something that that we're kind of interested in regarding our own ownership and our own, I suppose, keeping that type of model within the organisation, to ensure it grows, to ensure it's sustainable, to ensure it's secure, and it provides that landing pad for the community moving forward, to give that long-term future. I mean, regarding short-term lots or short-term leases for other land use in the city, I mean, it is possible that we could easily do that within the city centre using vertical farming, especially between vacant lots between buildings and the city centre. And it's something that we're actually demonstrating at COP26. We've got a small demonstrator showing a vertical farm in place there. But it's something that, that we can consider. The problem there comes with the ownership of the land and getting them to trust us with how we operate, you know, as in getting the access to that land for a short period of time. The land may be lying empty for 40 years, but they keep on saying to us that it's prime development land. And I don't know, I don't understand why we can't just use it for some good at the moment, you know, and, you know, have an interim agreement. But at this moment in time, you know, there doesn't seem to be that, I suppose, that cooperation between ourselves and the landowners. And that's something that we need to kind of unlock. I don't know how we do that, to be honest. Yeah.
You know, to address, yeah, you saw my chat comment. And I think that that's the answer. So what I said in the chat was that, you know, our fundamental problem across, you know, international cities, US cities, is the placing of economic interests and capitalism above sustainability and community needs. So that's all we have to solve. But, you know, in all seriousness, it's difficult to do this as a municipal employee, but any ways that we can foster awareness, education, participation, and advocacy on the community level, you know, to elected officials, make it an election issue, you know, that's what I think it's going to take. And as I mentioned, our new mayor has all these goals around new gardens and farms. Gardens and farms were not a big election issue for us, but the fact that he was young and progressive and wanted to do new things was. So I think, you know, ultimately, as a city employee, you're going to be constrained by your administration. So I guess you maybe have to change your administration.
Thank you so much, Abby, ending the session with such a positive note. And I am also very positive because as a member of circular development team here at ICLEI, we're working not only with food sector, also as well as we're working with other sectors such as build, environment, and construction sector. And often we do feel we can learn a lot from food sector. For example, the nature of cooperation or cooperative system. Can we actually enhance this part in housing structure to bring more cooperative housing, so on and so forth. And so here I would like to thank you all for your great contributions. So after this meeting, we will try to collect all the valuable information you have input and circulate this note around us. And earlier I mentioned this session will not be made in public, but I do feel there are lots of really valuable discussion among us, and probably will be very beneficial for a wider audience. So if you have any objection that we make this recording to public, please send us an emails and let us know. Otherwise, I would also like to already announce the next webinar series, which would be based on the City of Glasgow Challenge, which is also linked to one of our discussion points, really how do we engage with the private sector and to align the climate goal of our within the administrations. And the webinar will be held on 23rd of September, similar time like today. And I see Stefan is here. Maybe I will give Stefan 1 minute just to give us a quick preview of the next topic of this webinar. Please, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Ying-Chi. Next week we're looking forward to hearing some input to our challenge in Gelsenkirchen, which is, as Ying-Chi said, how do we engage the private sector for climate protection? So far, we're trying to gather some of our first movers in the city in climate protection and sustainability engagements to form what we call the Climate Forum. We held some smaller talks, which I will talk about next week some more. And yeah, we're facing some smaller challenges along the way on how to best connect those first movers and how to, in which format we will try to, you know, motivate them to form some kind of self-commitment to you know, contribute to the city goals in climate change. So that's what we're talking about next week, and I'm looking very forward to hearing of the interventions planned for that session. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you everyone for your participations. And here I wish you all a very nice day and see you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
It's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.